The planet Earth is not infinite. It's 71% water, 29% of it is land. Of that land, about half is useful. This is what everyone is, for lack of a better term, fighting over. Scarcity, and who owns what drives the thinking behind every system humans have come up with. And I've been hearing about one of those systems a lot lately.
The S word.
Socialism.
Is that socialism?
Socialist.
Socialism.
I am a democratic socialist!
Ask 10 people to define socialism and you'll hear 10 different answers. From the government owns the businesses, to free healthcare, to Denmark, to equality. But there is far more to it than that. This is a word that wars have been fought over. That brings emotion out of people that almost everyone has an opinion on.
I believe in socialism.
And when you call it socialism, I think it's a misnomer.
Socialism or capitalism?
Capitalism.
I think it depends on your interpretations.
I don't know anywhere in the world where true socialism has worked.
And some of those opinions are changing. More people are expressing interest in socialism today than they have in decades. So why did it ever come about? Why has it stood the test of time? Does it mean the same thing today? What exactly is socialism? This video is sponsored by Zapier. More on them later. At first, there was no need to think much about the idea of ownership. We walked around and ate what we hunted or picked out of the ground. But as the population grew, we started bumping into each other. Tribes, clans, civilizations began to form. Skirmishes grew into battles, which evolved into wars, with few exceptions, leaving the leader of whichever group won these wars the owner of whatever land they controlled. It was theirs to give. One person owned it. But the population continued to grow. Kingdoms got bigger. One man could not defend every border, could not judge every dispute, or till every field. So the rulers started giving land to trusted warriors and lords. Hold this land as your own. Defend it. In return, you'll send me your knights when I need them. Those lords, facing the exact same problem as the rulers, but on a smaller scale, divided the land further and gave it to people to work. Hold this land, grow food for us on it. In return, I'll protect you. Called different things around the world, varying in a few different ways, but the same basic idea. This system, feudalism, was how most of the world operated. A handful of well-connected people owned the land. People started to travel further. Ships got bigger. Villages turned into towns, towns into cities. The ability to grow something on land and then sell it to someone in a town or distant country for money instead of just consuming it yourself, this really started to change how people looked at land and where things start to get interesting and familiar, where everything changed. Rulers, these queens, kings, emperors, started to change what they demanded from the lords they had given land to. Forget your knights. I'll build my own army. From now on, you pay me taxes. Gold, silver coins, or goods I can trade to other kingdoms. That land I gave you can do more than just feed your estate. Figure out how to turn a profit on it and then give me some of that profit. Yes, your highness. And as was tradition, the lords turned right around and said the same thing to the people working their estates or running its workshops. New plan, everybody. Grow more than you need, sell it at the market, give me some of that profit. That simple act of changing what it was about land that made it valuable, moving from fight for me when I call to pay me money, meant it didn't really matter who owned the land anymore. Whether you could fight really well with a sword, whatever, as long as whoever owned it could pay the taxes on the land, which meant it was actually in the interest of the ruler now to let people buy, sell, and mortgage land. And so they did. Slowly at first, but over a couple centuries, many people could own the land. This marked the beginning of where we are today. It's this huge break from thousands of years of tradition where the thought that you, dear peasant, could own land was not even a concept. That was not a thought that people had. This is so interesting for a couple knock-on effects that I just have to touch on. It made the world less violent. The only way to acquire land stopped being raise an army and kill a bunch of people, take the land they were on as your own. You could just buy it instead now. Not saying it ended violence, of course not. These were violent times and violence continued, but a new option came into play. If someone figured out how to get more out of land than someone else, they would eventually use that more, that profit, to buy that other person's land, expand whatever they were doing, make more profit, buy more land, building more and more capital. Which brings us to here, a big messy transition period between the eras when some could own land to anyone, in theory, could. Because while anyone could own land, that did not mean that everyone did own land. Peasant life was brutal. It was dangerous. You didn't live long. You couldn't leave the estate you were tied to without the Lord's permission. You had few freedoms, no real rights, but it was stable. Life on the manor weren't half bad. A sturdy cottage, my own strip in the open fields, and the commons where the pigs rooted and the wife gathered kindling. Sure, the Lord took his share, but come feast days we danced, drank, and slept like kings. The seasons ruled us, not some clock. We ate what we grew, mended what we broke, and knew every soul in the village, stable as the old oak. Then the enclosures came. One spring they arrived with ropes and talk of improvement, commons fenced for sheep. pay a fee to work my strip, or we'll fold it into the big man's profitable fields. Progress, they said. Most of us couldn't. Suddenly we were free. Free to leave the land that had fed us, free to trudge to the town with nothing but calloused hands and rumbling bellies. Now I stand at the factory gate before dawn, trading my hours for coins that vanish on rent and stale bread. No commons, no strip, no village dance, just the endless clatter of machines and the knowledge that I made some distant bastard rich while my children cough in a damp room I don't own. Oliver Twist, Les Miserables, A Christmas Carol, all stories that are just bigger versions of the story we just heard, same time period, with very few, if any, safety nets for those that couldn't establish themselves, except for workhouses, aka poorhouses, which were not that different from prisons. Employers could pay and treat the lowest rungs of society basically however they wanted. They needed money, so they didn't end up in the poorhouse or worse. Working conditions, the terrible pay, get hurt and you're completely out of a job, child labor, all the worst parts of working you've heard of. That was this period. So it is no wonder that this is the time when the idea of socialism develops, that the people as a group, not rich individuals, should get the fruits of their labor. First, it was this utopian idea based on right and wrong, and what if we just did things like this? There was no reason why it would happen, just that would be nice, until one book raised the stakes. Capital, or the original version published in German Das Kapital, one volume turned into 3, 552 total pages. Karl Marx, most famous for the Communist Manifesto and who lends his name to Marxism, dropped what would become an enduring piece of history. Karl Marx was not a factory worker. He never stood at a factory gate before dawn. He was a middle-class kid from what is now Germany. Born in 1818, lawyer as a father, good education, PhD in philosophy, he wanted to be a professor. But his politics got in the way, so he became a journalist, and he was good at it. Good enough to get his newspaper shut down by the government. Then he got kicked out of Paris, then Brussels. By 1849, he landed in London, broke, and stayed there the rest of his life. And here's the part people don't spend much time on. Marx spent decades deep in poverty, pawning his coat in the winter. 3 of his children died young, and at one point, he couldn't afford a coffin. The man writing the book about capital had none of it. He survived on 2 things: freelance journalism, including a decade writing for a New York newspaper, and money from his best friend and writing partner Friedrich Engels, who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto. Engels' family owned cotton mills in Manchester, England. In a twist of irony, the book that would inspire revolutions against factory owners was funded by factory profits. So sitting in the British Museum room, day after day, year after year, Marx read everything. And we're talking everything: parliamentary reports, factory inspector records, economic data, and he asked just one simple question: why does this system produce so much wealth and so much misery at the same time? Capital, Volume 1, came out in 1867. Almost nobody noticed. He died in 1883. 11 people came to the funeral, people who would never have guessed that within 40 years, a third of the planet would be governed in his name, rallied by one very simple, very potent idea: profit is unpaid labor. When you walk into a store, you see prices on the shelves. You don't see the workers who made the product, how long they worked, or how much they were paid. The relationship between the person who made it and the person who buys it is hidden. Your purchase looks like a simple transaction: money for a shirt. But hidden inside that shirt is unpaid labor. The worker created more value than they were paid for. That difference, the profit, goes to the capitalist. Not necessarily because capitalists are evil, Marx would have said, but because it's built into how the wage system works. Rich owners keep getting richer and more powerful. Workers compete for jobs, which keeps wages down. To escape this, you, me, us, the people as a whole, must own the means of making the shirt. It's the only way to escape this oppressive working for wages. And it is here that 2 opposing forces that refuse to budge fight over what exactly profit is. The capitalists saying, what about losses? The socialists saying, losses are just failed exploitation. Without profit, there can't be prices. How will you know what to make? We'll know. To date, where we are today, it is that final question, how to know what to make, that has proven very hard for socialist societies to answer. Experiment after experiment has had to try in their own way, because what is probably the most interesting thing about Das Kapital, the key literature of socialism, it does not say how things should work. Marx offered no ideas for how to do things differently, no system, no outline. It's a full critique of capitalism, but the other side of the equation is left almost completely to interpretation, to answer simple questions like, how do you decide what to stock a grocery store with? Walk into any grocery store along with hundreds of other people who will visit it each day, and as you walk through the aisle, choosing what you will and will not put in your cart, upon committing to some and paying for them, you are saying to whoever makes it, yes, I want this. And against the infinite number of other things I can buy with $5, I'll take it. Add this up with all the people deciding how to spend their $5, and useful signals appear to those who make things. The group that made what sold makes enough money to keep making the thing. The group that didn't is now aware that they shouldn't keep making the thing, at least not at that price. Unable to find a price that works, don't sell the thing for long enough, and all the materials work, everything that went into making the losing thing will eventually have to stop making those products and will now be available to be used by some new maker that wants to test their hand at chocolate bars. Day after day, signals coming in from people of all walks of life saying, keep making that, don't keep making that, a bottoms-up system that lets the people vote for how they want the world's scarce resources to be used. Now, walk into a different grocery store. The shelves were stocked months ago by a group of planners who sat in a room and decided how much bread the store would need, how much bread every store would need, how much wheat to grow that bread, how many tractors to harvest that wheat, how much steel to build those tractors. There's no vote to add up because the deciding has already happened. The signal doesn't travel from your cart up to the maker, it travels from the plan down to the factory. The factory's job isn't to figure out what you want, it's to hit the number it was given. Make 10,000 chocolate bars this quarter. Whether anyone wants those chocolate bars is a separate question, and honestly, it's not the factory's question. And when nobody buys them, nothing stops. The materials, the workers, the machines, none of it gets released to some new maker with a better idea because they were never the factories to release. They stay right where the plan put them until a new plan says otherwise. The feedback that took one bad sales week in the first store takes months to years, sometimes never in this one. Day after day, decisions flowing in one direction from the few at the top to the many below, a top-down system, where a small group of people get to decide how the world's scarce resources will be used. But what about the real world? Not two imaginary grocery stores. What if we could set up an experiment? One city, one people, split down the middle for 28 years, then rejoined for 35. The finest grained natural experiment the world has ever run on socialism. Berlin is the experiment inside the experiment. It's almost too good of an experiment. You have allies during World War II, everyone working together to beat Germany, but they were not all friends. Capitalist in one group, the United States, England, and France, and a bunch of others. And then you have the Soviet Union, a fully socialist country, which became that way with a lot of help from the writing of Marx in Capital and the Communist Manifesto, which we've talked about a lot. This is what it looks like, where he said revolution is necessary to tear down the system. It will not tear itself down, rise against capitalism. This is what Vladimir Lenin used during the Bolshevik Revolution. Anyway, with Germany defeated, the usual splitting up of the loser's territory began. Germany as a whole was split up into 4 different zones, with each of the 4 allied countries administering part of it. But Berlin was too important. It was the capital. France, the US, and England were like, no, just because it's deep in the Soviet side doesn't mean we don't get to be there. So Berlin, completely surrounded by Soviet-occupied Germany, was split into 4 zones. The US, England, and France in the west, Soviets taking the east. A tiny sliver of democracy and capitalism in Soviet territory, an affront to the Soviet system. So the Soviets try to force the issue. They cut off rail, they block roads, they try to force West Germany into their control. It doesn't work.
275,000 flights at an estimated cost to America and England of over $300 million defeated the Russians' diabolical plan. They gave up the blockade on May 12, 1949. All the barriers were lifted. Normal traffic began again. The free world had called Russia's bluff in the high-stakes poker game of international politics.
For 11 months, the West fed 2 million people from the sky, 277,000 flights. At the peak, a plane lands every 62 seconds. Most of the cargo, 2/3 of it, is coal. The Soviets blink. They lift the blockade and Berlin settles into being 2 cities wearing one name. And then the quiet part starts. People leave. Not dramatically, a metro ticket, a suitcase, get on the train, ride a few stops, don't come back. Between 1949 and 1961, 2.7 million East Germans from Berlin and the rest of East Germany exit Soviet-occupied Germany through this one open seam, stepping over the line between East and West Berlin. The most disturbing part to the Soviets is half of them are under 25. Doctors, engineers, teachers. The East loses a quarter of its physicians. That many people does not go unnoticed. It was quite obvious to everyone at this point. So 12 years after the last plane of the airlift landed, East Germany's leader holds a press conference. A journalist asks about rumors of a border closing. His answer: nobody has the intention of building a wall. The journalist didn't ask about a wall. Nobody had asked about a wall. He introduced the word himself. A Freudian slip, as he certainly knew what would happen 59 days later. I've used Zapier for over 5 years, but the latest way I'm using it has made my whole team faster. It is a small team. Everyone's building their own tools now, some in Claude Code, some in Codex, ChatGPT, whatever they like. And every one of those tools needs to reach the same apps: Slack, Google Drive, Stripe, email, Shopify. The old way, every single person sets up their own connection to every single service. 6 people times a dozen apps, it's a mess and nobody really knows who has access to what. With Zapier MCP, everyone on my team makes one connection, and that single connection puts more than 9,000 apps on the other side. Slack, Stripe, Shopify, our database, all of it. One setup instead of a dozen, and nothing's off the menu. And I still have control over how it's all used. Permissions are set per tool. The team can read from our database but not write to it, instead of asking people to be careful and make the risky thing impossible. The team is more willing to build things, and everyone can use their own tools. The Zapier MCP lets you build faster and make sure you keep your data, your tools, your models, and your rules. You can start for free with my Zapier link, also in the description. Thank you to Zapier for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. The barbed wire was strung, streets torn up, train lines severed, all in one night. No wall when the sun went down. Wake up and there's a wall, running 96 miles through the center of the city and wrapping around the edges of West Berlin, cutting it off from East Berlin and the East German countryside. The concrete came within a week. We've all seen a wall, but this one, everything they built, the guard towers, the dog runs, the tripwires, all of it faces inward. So now, our two imaginary grocery stores are real, and they're 20 minutes apart. East side, the Kafala at Leninplatz carries about 3,000 items, one of each, not yellow mustard and spicy mustard, one mustard. West side, Bala, one of 120 in West Berlin, about 7,000 items competing with 3 other chains, including what would become today's Aldi. The West side, it's a normal market. People buy things. The price of those things is set by the store. If they don't sell or more than normal sells, the store manager will adjust their next order. The East side is a much more interesting story. What you're about to see and hear is exactly how the economy was planned for Berlin and the Soviet Union as a whole, using historical documents going from the top to the bottom. The decision for what goes into the East Side grocery begins 1,000 miles away in Moscow, where the head of the Soviet Communist Party is located. The word Politburo you might have heard before. This is it. The head of the party, the Politburo, a committee of 11 men, sets the priorities for all of the Soviet Union for the next 5 years. What do we want for our population? How should we prioritize the military? Are there any industries we want to develop? Are there any we would like to shut down? Many big decisions, all written down in the official 5-year plan. And it's a beast. It's huge. Hundreds of pages long. The 5-year plan is then handed to the State Planning Commission. 3,000 people in that commission map it all out in physical units. This much grain becomes this much flour, becomes this many loaves of bread, 2,000 commodities. Grain, coal, gravel, glass, everything is balanced in a ledger with the explicit goal of ensuring fairness in the spirit of from each according to their ability to each according to their contribution. But early on, the Politburo realized that if they just handed things out, here's your pair of shoes, here's your bread for the week, the people would feel like medieval peasants, as terrible for morale, and more importantly, terrible for getting people to work. Somebody still needs to make the bread. So the State Planning Commission was also in charge of deciding how much people should be paid. So they create the ledger of stuff to make and the wage scale, which simply divides the entire workforce into 8 broad pay bands. The lowest worker earning $2.50 per hour, the highest earning $7. You could not earn more and you could not earn less. And here's where it's easy to feel lost. You're giving people wages, which is money, which means you're going to buy something with that money. But everything is kind of free. What do you spend this money on? Okay, so there must be prices in this system. It has to be prices. Okay, if there are prices, how is the price of a loaf of bread decided? Enter the Office of Prices. That's its real name. They are handed the ledger of stuff to make and the wage scale. With the wage scale, they can see how much in total wages will be paid. Here's our entire workforce. Here's how much it will be paid. They can also see how much total stuff will be made. With all that data, the Office of Prices would ask questions like, how much should a family of 4 spend on bread? It should be cheap, not more than 1% of the lowest earning worker. If the lowest earning worker earns 1,000 Deutschmarks in a month, and the ledger says they get 10 loaves of bread in a month, then a loaf of bread should be 1 Deutschmark. Asking this kind of question over and over until all their numbers added up in a way that balanced how much people were paid in wages against what the plan had said each person was allotted. Milk, furniture, car tires, gasoline, medicine, every price was tagged, stamped on, or even engraved into the thing before it left the factory. The price was simply the price. It was not set based on anything other than deciding how much of a thing a person should need in a year and then how much of that person's pay should be used to buy it. All right, so with prices set, the Office of Prices hands everything over to East Germany's Ministry of Trade and Supply. They take it and assign quotas and allotments across the region's 15 districts. Berlin is the 15th district. You have this many people, you get this much. The bakery here makes this much bread, so you get this much flour. Everything is signed to a physical location. The state bakeries in the 15th district get flour delivered on a truck. They bake bread with it, put that bread on a truck, and the manager of the grocery store unloads the truck. They unload the truck with whatever arrives. The outcome of this experiment can be highlighted in many ways. By the time the wall came down, the East Berlin grocery store still had about 3,000 items, while the West ones pushed towards 10,000. The big markets cleared 15,000. But the clearest outcomes show up in two very different parts of life. By the time the Berlin Wall came down, the wait time for either of the two cars you could buy was over 10 years. The main car you could buy in East Berlin, the Trabant, was the exact same car the state-run auto company produced at the time the wall went up. Same materials, about the same engine, no upgrades for over 30 years. Used ones went for more than new ones because people didn't want to wait 10 years. West Berlin, on the other hand, had dozens of cars and you could buy one same day. And then there was health. Over that same 30 years, these neighbors, friends, family who shared a city, they breathed the same air, had the same genetics. Those in East Berlin had a life expectancy 2.5 to 3 years shorter than West Berlin. It's well documented, deeply studied. Within 10 years of the wall being torn down, East and West being unified, 1989 to 1999, the gap completely erased. Those in East Berlin had the exact same life expectancy as those in the West. What's not clear to me today, though, is if this is what people mean when they talk about socialism, this true top-down kind of society. That's not what Nordic countries are. Sweden, Norway, Finland, they're free markets. Prices are set by the grocery store owner. The government then collects a lot of tax on everyone, not just the wealthy. Businesses can hire and fire at will. There's nothing different about their capitalism than a place like the U.S. But there's a massive safety net funded by taxes. If you did it in the U.S., the average income here is about $70,000. So in Denmark, if you make 1.5 times more than the average, you pay about 54% in total taxes. So that would be an income of about $105,000 here. Everybody is taxed. But the means of production are most definitely not owned by the government, the people. In fact, the Nordic countries intentionally set themselves up like this. They watched what happened in the early part of the Russian Revolution and were like, no, we're not going to do that. So we've never seen a true socialist system of any size really fulfill the ideas laid out by Marx. We've seen a very real dedicated effort to do it, but they've all ended up at about the same spot. So why hasn't it worked? Stalin, 29 years. Mao Zedong, 27 years. Fidel Castro, 49 years. The average rule for leaders of socialist systems is over 15 years, longer if you look at the ones who were ruling for a long time but died in office, like Hugo Chavez. Blame the person, yes, these men were not good people, but there have been no truer words spoken than these. Play the clip.
The basic rule on incentives is you get what you reward for.
A center that decides where everything goes, it is the ultimate place of power a human can be stationed, directing the flow of calories, electricity, medicine. So much power radiating out from one point changes the incentives of everybody in the system. The manager of the East Berlin grocery store has no reason to care what customers actually want. If the store runs out of milk by 10 a.m., the manager doesn't lose a dime. In fact, fewer customers means less work. Croissants are incredibly time-consuming to make, layer by layer just right, otherwise they don't puff. The bakery is much better off having dense, thick loaves of bread that take a fifth of the time to make and fill their quota faster. They have no other bakery to compete with for customers, so no consequences. And the truck driver moves weight, not loaves of bread. Gravel, nails, bricks, machinery will all be moved before bread because the faster the quota is filled, the faster the driver can be done. Why would you work any longer than you have to? Because the planning board has said what you will be paid. Doing better is just more work that doesn't come with a reward. And the 3,000 people in the Planning Commission, they just want to be told the quotas they assigned were hit. Last thing the chief of the commission wants to do is tell the Politburo they made a mistake. It's all downside. If you get fired, what other planning commission is there to work for? And the people in the very top really don't want to hear the area they're responsible for isn't working anyway. So much power is concentrated at the top, and there's no way to get there except for someone to select you to the post that a weakness in your area is someone else's political ammunition to have you removed. So a very, very small group of people ends up running the system. And they run it blindly because no one brings them problems, because why would they? Unless, of course, that person is trying to move up the system. In which case, that's a threat for those occupying one of those few spots at the top. You should probably get rid of that person so they can't make any more noise and install someone who tells you everything is going well. So the leader hears no bad news and would be skeptical if he did. He's paranoid from years of people trying to get to the center of power to adjust the system in their favor, because adjusting the whole system in your favor or taking someone else's power is the only route to getting more. Can't go start a business, can't get elected, the pie is fixed. So one person doing better takes from someone else. The result has been one person and a tiny group of trusted advisors consolidate control of two things: the military and the means of production. A monopoly on violence and a monopoly on production. Human nature is simply not intended to hold that much power. It's so tempting to make sure you stay in power, to put your thumb on the scale. There's the old saying, power corrupts and absolute power absolutely corrupts. Maybe that could change. One of the things that could change that is a massive amount of abundance. If there isn't scarcity, socialism and even communism seems almost likely. There would be no reason for markets, prices, and power structures. Everything is just available. Enough to go around, no needing to fight over who gets what. Perhaps the flaws in our human nature are smoothed out. But we aren't there yet. We still live on a planet with 71% water, 29% land, and a finite amount of resources. Because of that, the question of who owns what is not going to go away. Both of the systems we looked at today, at their core, human attempts to solve the exact same problem, how to manage that scarcity. One system trusts chaotic decisions of millions, the other trusts a collective planned vision. Maybe the ultimate system isn't one we've tried yet. Or maybe until we reach a world of absolute abundance, we are destined to keep shifting the needle back and forth between the security of the collective and the freedom of the individual. But whatever the future holds, it will still be driven by that very basic, very human question: who owns what and who gets to decide? And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.